Hello, my name is John Neal and I'm going to make this wooden box out of hardwoods. And the first thing to do, put the apron on. If you do put an apron on, make sure you don't have anything hanging out. So these tabs, which I tie at the front, I will tuck in so they don't get caught up in any machinery. But first, a quick cup of tea, of course. Always essential to start well. Now these clamps are holding together some strips of wood which I'm going to make into the lid. There's stained oak, some cedar wood and some beech wood there as well. I'm going to leave it long like that so it will go through the next machine properly. Let's just put the clamps back. I find these clamps very useful. They're wide and I've extended the handles with some tape. Right, this is the planer and it's one of my favourite machines. Those surfaces have got candle wax on them to allow the wood to go through easily. This first pass is just to find the height and grab the rollers, so nothing's being cut at the moment. And then I can set the rollers down a little bit further and start to cut. There we go. Do one side, take it down a few millimeters and then cut the other side as well. It is really satisfying using this machine to see the wood come out just absolutely smooth and perfect like that. Right, now we can trim the ends off using the mitre saw. You'll notice I've made a fence to catch the smaller pieces, or support them at least. So that's one side, and I'm keeping it the same way up, so if there's any flare out on the bottom of the wood it's the same on both sides, but fortunately it's fine. You'll notice I'm throwing all the little bits of wood at the bottom on the floor where the other shavings went. Now I'm going to take this length of oak wood and cut a single saw cut along the bottom edge to take the floor, the base of the box. Just checking which side's best to go inside with respect to outside. It's important to rehearse all the bits, so got the push on the wood and keep it nice and safe. Now this is the plywood. It's birch ply and it's 3.6mm thick and it fits in that saw groove perfectly. It's a new blade actually. It happens to be just the right size. I'm now tilting the blade over to 45 degrees, which is pretty accurate, I have to say. You'll see later the joints look very good indeed. Now here's one of the two sledges I've got. This one, you'll notice, got two cuts on it. This is for the 45 degrees. It is possible to get these angles the wrong way around, so I just always mark them with a pencil just to make sure I know what I'm doing. Right, so this first one's got to start the mitre 45 degrees off. So just cut this one. And then I now need to, and this is important, that's always a surface to work back on, so wait until the blade has stopped, which is now, and then we can go to the surface of the saw and start marking out. So I'm now just going to get the length of the side relative to the lid. And they're marked across. And to get the two lengths exactly the same, I'll need to put a block on one end. And unfortunately I've got the pencil mark against the fence, which is a bit awkward, but we'll manage. Hold a block there. Now that held block could provide kickback, but the blade is in fact tilted away from it, so that's fairly safe. Right, now to reverse that mitre cut, throw that bit away, and then cut one again exactly the same size. Now these two have got to be absolutely accurately the same, so we'll wait until the saw blade stops, put them together and just touch them on the surface to check they're exactly the same size. and measure them up against the lid. And they will look like that. Now all we need to do is trim the end of this back to the other mitre. So just take that end off, throw that away, and now measure up for the shorter of the two sides. And again, just make a mark and clearly indicate which way the mitre's got to be cut. Put that in place and then set the block against it so I can do two of these shorter ones exactly the same. There's one, trim the end back, throw that bit away, turn it over, touch the block. And you use quite a bit of wood up for these processes, so make sure the length of wood to start with is pretty long. I just managed that quite well. Just waiting for the blade to stop. There we go. Now we can just line everything up and make sure it looks okay. So the groove for the base is at the top here, because the whole thing's upside down at the moment. And then that looks pretty good. Right, over to the bench, and let's put this together. But first, I've got to cut the plywood for the base. It's 3.6mm, and it's a birch ply. It's a really nice piece of wood actually, but it's slightly too big, you'll find in a minute, so I'll have to cut it in half. Right, you've got to fill the whole of the groove, the rebate, with the ply, the full length. If it's too short, it doesn't work, so it's got to be pretty accurate. Well, let me just cut the whole thing in half to start with, almost touching the fence at the back, but not quite, so it doesn't catch. Right, having done that, and I like to get the grain going long ways in the box, line it up and keep the blade as low as you can get it. It doesn't need to be high. Right, let's just check that against that long side. And that looks pretty good. You can always put the side piece in as well if you want, just to check. But now we'll put the shorter side and measure that up against the ply. Completely fill the groove from that end to the other. Just pull it down so it holds still and mark where that's got to be cut. And then cut it slightly big if you have to, and then you can always take a little bit off. So just check that looks okay. I think that looks pretty good as it is. Don't forget you can always cut a tiny piece off, you can't stick it back on. This is important to put all the parts together and make sure there are no gaps. If it's too small, you've got to start again. But if it's the right size, it should all fit together and those joints be nice and tight. Right, over to the bench and let's stick this together. So those are all the four parts and the floor of the box. I'm just going to use some white glue, PVA wood glue, and I put a generous amount on the two ends of the short sides on both of those, and that is enough to hold the whole lot together. It's quite a warm day, so the glue will set pretty quickly. Really pleased with those joints. They fit together really well on the corners. Right, hold it the right way up. And then just to hold it in place, a couple of elastic bands. Actually sent away for these to get some decent bands. I've got a bag of them, which are very useful because after a while they deteriorate. You need to replace them. So 2 elastic bands is enough to hold this in place. They don't need a lot of pressure to hold the glue there. Now all I've got to do is make sure all the joints are in line. So I'll press these together here, there, make sure that one's okay. That one, it might be a little bit of squeeze out, which would be good, but the joints look very good. A little touch of sandpaper towards the end will be helpful. Now they move slightly, those joints, so I'm just going to square everything off. Make sure it's absolutely okay. This is important because if the lid goes back on, it's got to go back on either one way or the other. It can't fit one way because it's not completely square. Right, on with the lid now. I love the patterning on this wood when you stick all these together. On the long side, along with the grain, I'm now just going to use a small hand plane and take those edges off. There are other ways of doing this. You can sand it off, you can route it off with a rounded router, but I like to maybe do this. Having done this long with the grain, you can go across the grain and hopefully not take the edges away. Although that cedar wood on the edge is rather delicate, I have to say, it does split off. So do the long sides first. And this is the bottom, I'm not taking quite so much off. And I'll finish that off with sandpaper and or the random sander. Here it is. This is a very, very useful little bit of kit. It's very safe to use because you really can't hurt yourself with it. And you can put various grades of paper on it. And it does produce a beautiful finish. Right, that looks all okay. The proportions of the overhang are important to get those right to make the box look good. And then just finish off with a bit of hand sandpaper work. It's got a little bit of raw linseed oil on it, and you can start to see the finish I'm going to get, which is always a lovely part of the process. Finally getting the dust off and putting that on. And there we have it. The final box oiled up with some raw linseed oil. And you can see here that the lid has got an extra piece on the inside to lock it in the top, and it fits perfectly either way round, which is important. But really pleased with those corner joints, just on the quality of the table saw which cut them. Now that could be used for potpourri, matches, salt and pepper, all sorts of things. My wooden box.